So how do you go from your fur looking like this to this? Well, in this video, I'm going to be showing you 5 components to how you can make your fur look tons more realistic, and showing you some of the mistakes you might be making that is keeping you from drawing super realistic fur. And we're starting right now. When it comes to drawing fur, there are quite a few things that need to happen in order for it to look realistic. And of course, a number of things that shouldn't be happening as well. And the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you're sketching in enough details to help you separate out every strip of fur. If you don't draw a detailed enough sketch, you're going to make things a lot harder for yourself to try and draw wavy and curly fur types. Wavy fur tends to have a lot of technicality to it, especially the more curly kinds, because there are lots of different sections or strips, and then there are different details, patterns, and shapes within those. So it really is important to set yourself straight on the right path to making sure you sketch out as many different strips of details as you can. It is time consuming, yes, but it is necessary to ultimately help you out through the drawing process and make things a lot easier on yourself in figuring out where to put other details. Next is that you want to make sure your stroke directions are coming to a halfway point of each strip of fur and slightly different from one stroke to the other. This is going to build that subtle structure and volume of fur within the strips you are drawing. What you don't want to do is draw your strokes going through the entire strip of fur. This will give you fur that looks like a strip of lined fabric instead of flowy and natural looking individual hairs. What you also want to do is make sure that as you are drawing these strokes, you lift off and apply less pressure as you come to the end of where you're making the stroke from. This gives the stroke you make a subtle gradient effect that is very important with the transitioning of shadows and highlights within the strips of fur. If you don't do this, you will have harsh ending strokes to your fur that will make the effect of fur you draw look less realistic. It won't look smooth and flowy. The next thing you're going to want to do for realistic looking fur is make sure you're choosing a variety of different colors to use within your fur. Now, for this particular fur type in this video, we're working with black fur, so there aren't nearly as many colors as you would need as maybe some other fur types. It's important that you get the right number of different colors to use with the fur that you're drawing because it is one of the ways to build depth, as well as add the right colors to get a close look to what you're going for. If you don't use enough colors within your fur, it won't have that high realism look, which is important with black fur as much as it is with any other fur color, even white or light colored fur as well. A common mistake I see people making is using one color for the highlights, one for the midtones, and one for the shadows. This may work in some types of fur, however, it will not work for most because oftentimes the right fur color is a blend of multiple colors. And to get that blend, you sometimes have to draw multiple overlapping fur stroke layers for the colors to mix themselves, and you get the color that you need. One thing that is also important when it comes to choosing colors is that you need to pay attention to the different colors for the shadows of your fur. What you might use for the shadows of fur in a more highlighted patch of fur that you're drawing is not always the same colors you should use for the more shaded patch of fur on your same subject. The next component is making sure you've got enough buildup of gradual gradients within each strip of fur. Gradients are the light and dark areas within each strip of fur, and within each strip of fur there are different levels and shapes of these gradients, and it is important to try and match each different one accordingly. Now, gradients are also important to have within the base layer as well as maintaining it as you gradually add more and more layers and continue building that fur even more. Getting a good base layer down of gradients to start with will help you maintain it through the drawing process. If you don't draw these important gradients within your wavy fur, you will be left with fur that looks very flat and it will not have that wave look to it. Really, the key to drawing that wavy looking fur is to get the gradients right. The next component is values, and this is similar to gradients in a sense that it's important to get the proper gradients, but values are an overall for the entire drawing, not just each individual strip of fur. As important as it is to get the right gradients in your strips of fur, it is important that you also get the right values within those strips of fur as you are drawing fur strokes, shadows, and other details. When you don't have the right values within your fur, it will actually harm the realism of your drawing the most. It really is the most defining important aspect to drawing real looking fur. When you have it right, you will notice a drastic difference between fur that has it and doesn't have it. To help yourself with values, make sure with each layer you add, check the values by comparing them to your reference photo. Then make the adjustments you need to account for the differences between them. I also like to double and triple check my values once I've reached a point with my drawing when I think I might be finished. Then I make any adjustments I need, and usually the adjustments I end up making are to add darker values. Now I'm going to be breaking down and taking you step by step through all of these components to drawing fur with this fur tutorial, where you can watch me draw some black wavy fur and learn some more tips and techniques. Now the first thing I'm going to do is add in the color to my base layer using Def Blue. Usually when I draw black fur, the color of choice that I often use is Def Blue. However, there are times when black fur can call for different colors. It just so happens that the one that I am drawing from my reference has a lot of a purple color to it, and this Def Blue has enough of that color with it to add into my base layer. Now, in this case, this bluish color black fur actually has a little bit more blue color than purple tones, so I am taking Indianthrene blue. Now with adding the base layer to a lot of fur that's dark, like especially this black fur that I'm working on, you won't always see the purple colors show through everything that you put on later, all of the black layers that you're adding. But it is still a process I do take with all of my fur, regardless of how it's going to end up looking in the end, because usually you never know exactly what you're going to have ending up showing through in the end with all of the other layers that you add. So it's a good idea to try and get those lighter colors down first into your fur as your base layer, and that way you're covered for the just in case anything of whatever's going to happen with your drawing throughout the drawing process. Now I'm just going to take my brush with some odorless mineral spirits and blend out this base layer of mine so that the pigments are semi-permanent into the paper. This makes it much easier for me through the drawing process later as I'm adding in details over the top. It kind of sets that base layer into the paper so that it can't be messed with or lifted off in the instance that I have to, erase anything through the drawing process. If you would like to, you can head on over to my Patreon and get the reference photo for this fur type so that you can try to follow along for yourself. It's completely free. I have a link in my description of this video if you want to click on that, check it out, and download it for yourself so that you can have an easier time trying to understand what I'm doing in trying to make my fur look like the reference photo that I'm using. So now that I've got all of that purple color blended out, I'm going to allow it 15 minutes to dry before I add any layers over the top of that. However, I am going to start adding some black, or my first layer of black, down on all of those areas of the paper that are still white. And now I'm gonna go ahead and blend all of the black areas out as well. All of the black areas within this fur are areas that are actually black in the reference photo as well. So these are gonna end up being these super dark areas, and that is why I have started them out being really dark to begin with. And now I'm going to take my black pencil with a fairly sharp tip, and I'm going to start working in the first series of the first stroke layers. Now, with these first stroke layers, it's important to just try to maintain making shapes. Don't focus so much on trying to draw hairs. Trying to draw hairs, you're going to end up messing everything up and making it look a lot more like just fabric instead of actual hairs. With these clumpy sections of fur, you actually don't see a whole lot of individual hairs. They really are just more of clumpy shapes with indications of loose little hairs here and there. And that really is what makes it look realistic. You need to try and capture that with these strips of fur that you're drawing so that you can make your fur look more realistic. So I'm starting off on kind of the bottom sections of these on the left, and I'm drawing up to the middle and not all the way to the upper end completely, but kind of tapering off in that halfway point, which I've mentioned before earlier in this video that is important as you're trying to draw your fur strokes. You don't want them to be one continuous line throughout the entire shape, because there is kind of a gradient effect between the lighter areas and the darker areas in each strip. And then there usually are, well, in this case, there are some sections of these strips that have multiple light areas and one dark area. So it's important that I'm trying to taper off and apply less pressure as I come to an ending area where it's going to be lighter with that particular strip that I'm drawing. So as I continue to keep adding more of these strokes in there, I'm focusing on just trying to get the different shapes of each individual line. If you could think of each stroke of hair, or whatever you want to think of it as, if you could think of it as just a shape instead of actual hairs, that would help you out so much easier in trying to understand exactly what you need to be doing with trying to create realistic looking long wavy fur. Because really all you're trying to do is just mimic the different patterns that you're seeing in each one of those different strips of hair or fur. As I'm continuing to draw, I am singling out all of the different shapes kind of on the sides of each of these strips. I'm putting in little indications of some strands that are coming into other sections. I'm trying to create all of those little details as the first kind of initial layer for those, and I'll work on building those up later on through the drawing process. And as I'm working further into creating all of the different blocky shapes and adding some fur strokes in, I am also trying to finish out some of the shapes for the strips that I've gotten drawn in. Not all of them are the exact shapes for the reference photo or what I actually want for them, because not all of this looks exactly like the reference photo. But so I'm trying to just finish out some of the shapes that I have drawn as well by creating some solid lines within the blocky dark sections that I have. So now I'm taking white and adding this over the top of the strips that I have down. I'm not adding a whole lot. I'm mostly just focusing this on the areas that are highlighted. I'm doing this to preserve kind of the lightness of those strips, as well as the white that I'm using is a Caran d'Ache Luminance white, and it is more of a wax-based pencil than the oil-based pencils of Faber-Castell that I am using otherwise. So with this wax white that I'm putting down, I'm softening the look to some of those strips, as well as I'm adding, of course, a light barrier for the highlighted sections. Now I am going to take a smaller brush with odorless mineral spirits, and I'm going to soften out a lot of what I have down. I'm trying to soften out the graininess of the paper that's showing through, so I'm just smoothing out the colored pencil that I have on the paper for both the shadows and some of the highlighted sections of strips of fur. Now, just to make sure that I have enough color for these, I am adding a layer of Death Blue over the top of this now. So now I'm taking Cold Gray 4, which is the darker cold gray in the set of Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils that I have, and I'm adding this over the top of those strips to kind of darken out some of those lighter values that I originally had there. Now I'm going to take black and try to get those shadow values as dark as those need to be. One of the easiest ways that you can help yourself out and trying to make sure that you get the values right in your work is trying to get your darks as dark as those need to be first before you start finishing off any of the other values in what it is you're trying to draw. This way, it kind of eliminates the lightest sections that you may have already gotten down on your drawing. Now you're adding in the darkest values for those sections as well. And so then you will have an easier time trying to judge what values in between that you need to get for the other areas of your drawing. I'm now going to start adding some of those really dark values over on the right side as well. Now I'm going to take my brush with odorless mineral spirits and blend this out. While that right side is drying, I'm going to take my white luminance pencil and go over the top of all of my strips, adding in the highlights that they need, as well as any individual floaty hairs to help it look real. Now that the right side is dry, I'm going to finish off the black values over there and get those as dark as everything needs to be. And I'm just going to take some black now and readjust some of the values that I have. It's important, of course, as I said, to double and triple check your work, or as I like to do when I think I'm close to being done with my drawing, is just check that reference photo of my drawing and try to get the values a little more accurate. And this does mean adjusting one little area and another one, and who knows how many, because depending on which area I'm looking at and comparing to the reference photo, there's going to be differences between the changes that I need to make. But values are the most important, so I'm going to try my best to make all of the necessary adjustments to get those values close to the reference photo. And I'm also going to add a layer of Def Blue over the top of that to make sure I've got enough color in there. And then I'm going to top everything off with white on the right side as well, and trying to incorporate some of those little wispy hairs. You can learn more about how to draw fur with the colored pencils from the top right video, where I talk about how you can learn to build fur structure to get more realism with your fur. Additionally, you can learn even more about drawing and fur from my real-time tutorial videos on Patreon. Sign up and get instant access to a growing library with new ones added monthly. A link is in the description as well as on the screen here. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.